Hi, good evening, Congresswoman.
Good evening. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for joining us. I know there are a lot of folks that are coming into the chat and into the conversation that have been looking forward to this. And so why don't we jump right in? So I'd like to welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for tonight's Justice Now conversation, sponsored by the National Urban League. I'm your host, Jerica Richardson, and I serve as the Senior Vice President for Equitable Justice and Strategic Initiatives at the League. So I must admit, I'm just going to say it. Tonight is a really special conversation for me because you are my hometown Congresswoman. I'm from Somerset, New Jersey, so I know we have a lot of urban leaguers from Jersey on and joining us. So let us know where you're dialing in from and drop that information in the chat. But tonight we are going to talk about the Black Woman Best Report and the legislative agenda surrounding that. We want to touch on a whole host of issues in addition to that, and food insecurity, hair discrimination, mental health for women. And I am so pleased to be joined by Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman, who is serving in her fifth term in the House of Representatives. She represents New Jersey's 12th district, and for those of you who don't know, that's Central Jersey. And really, the Congresswoman has been a trailblazer. She made history as the first African-American woman to represent the great state of New Jersey in Congress. So Congresswoman, thank you so much for joining us. It's great to
Thank you. I'm
have you with
delighted
us.
to be here with you.
Well, let's jump right in. I think we would love to talk about the report, but I think it's also important to talk a little bit about you and hear about who inspired you, what inspired you. We know public service has been something you've been engaged in well before your time in Congress. You've been a leader in the state of New Jersey. It seems to be in your DNA. So tell us a little bit of what inspired you to serve and what inspired you to focus on public policy.
So my first job while I was still going to college was with the New Jersey Division on Civil Rights and got to enforce the law against discrimination. I was a field representative, kind of moved up through the system, was a bureau chief and things of that nature. Probably one of the best jobs in my life because I got to stand up for people who were being discriminated against in housing, employment, and public accommodations. Never thought that I'd spend a lot of time in state government, that there was just someplace I was as I was trying to figure out how to become the Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court, not realizing at that time in my life it would be such a critically important job and woefully inadequately represented at this moment, you know? But then I was recruited by another department, the Department of Transportation, to head up their affirmative action and equal opportunity program, a brand new program, set it up for them. I was there for a number of years, and then I was recruited by the Department of Community Affairs to head up a new office that was going to implement the rooming and boarding house standards to protect individuals who were being deinstitutionalized, sent into the communities, but without the infrastructure and support to take care of them. And I stayed there. I was the assistant commissioner, etc. Then I retired. Thinking that I was going to work with my father, who was at that moment, he was still in the legislature. I thought he and I were going to work together and do some policy stuff and government relations. And he took ill and it didn't happen. And a year after, well, I would say he died in June, in January or November of that next year. No, even before that, about October, found out that his seat was going to be vacated in the assembly. And since I was a daddy's girl and loved him, adored him so much, that I decided I would consider running for office. Never, ever having a desire to run for office was my way of keeping him alive. And that's what I did. I ran for office, held the seat that he once held, worked in appropriations, that he was one of the first appropriation committee members or committee chairs in the country of color. And I did a number of things in New Jersey. I was the chair of the Democratic Party. I was the majority leader in the assembly. Then I found out, I woke up one morning, look at my Facebook page, and it said, "Run, Bonnie, run." And I'm like, "Run what?" And it, come to find out that Rush Holt, who was the then congressman, had decided to retire. And I had friends on Facebook were saying, "You're going to run, you're going to run." And so here I am.
I love that. Um, One, how meaningful and how beautiful it is that you really continued your father's legacy and really the rich work that you were doing, but that you also answered the call. I think so many times we have conversations about public service and we talk about the contributions of Black women. Oftentimes, there are folks that are organizing, working on the ground, leading their communities, leading their schools, leading their churches, showing up and showing out even when other folks don't. Um, and how often people are in that service space. And we talk and we encourage Black women and others from marginalized groups to run and step up. And so thank you for being an example of what happens when you answer the call and you run. And really, there's been so much great policy that has come out of your tenure and your time both in New Jersey and in the House of Representatives in Washington. So I want to dig into that a little bit when we're
Can I
talking
say
about,
something about that?
sure,
Because,
this, jump in.
being in public service for so many years and being of the generation that I encountered very few women in some of the spaces that I worked, and absolutely no Black women, no women of color in the spaces that I worked. So for me to see what's happening now with Black women leading, being, participating, and being creative in all these different spaces is something for me to behold. And it's something that my 9-year-old granddaughter that I simply adore and think she's the most precious gift God could have given me, other than my son, for her to see this is going to be her life. And she's going to be able to aspire without question to anything she wants.
That's so powerful. And no, you are obviously inspiring her, but you've inspired so many of us that have stepped into public policy. You've been getting a lot of love in the chat, and so I want to lift that up. Folks have been chiming into saying where they're from. I saw a couple pink and green hearts here, so you have our sorors on as well. And so that's really exciting. And if we talk about Black women's leadership and the amazing things that are done, I want to dig a little bit into Black Women Best. And we can't do it without acknowledging the great work of Janelle Jones, who really is the first Black woman to serve as chief economist at the Department of Labor. Okay, there goes some more hearts. I think we started something. The way Janelle Jones has really created this Black Woman Best framework, and it's described as an economic principle that argues that when Black women's economic well-being is centered in policy, that the entire economy thrives. I want you to talk a little bit more about that because I know you, along with Congresswoman Yvette Clarke and Congresswoman Robin Kelly, really have been pushing the Black Woman Best legislative agenda. You co-chair the Congressional Caucus on Black Women and Girls. Why center Black women? Because I'm sure there are some folks that may have toned in and said, if we're caring about the economy and what's best for everybody, why are we focusing on Black women?
Because when we look at where Black women are in all the various platforms, economic, healthcare, educational, resources, housing needs, all of those things, when we look at where Black women are, we typically find ourselves at the lowest end of the rung. And we are the ones that are confronted with so many barriers, distractions, and intentional racism, sexism that prevents us from prospering to the degree that we can. And so the Congressional Caucus on Black Women and Girls, with the amazing, brilliant staff that we have, just looked at the framework, that looked at the areas of policy and legislation that impact people, their lives, their ability to move up, their safety and security in communities, their taking care of their families, whatever, and came up with this agenda for Black women best, recognizing that if we lift the boat for Black women or whomever is at the bottom, if we eliminate the barriers that exist to their accomplishment and their prosperity, then everyone similarly situated above that will benefit. Because the policies will be centered around eliminating benefits, creating opportunities, assessing real needs and readiness and the ability, things of that nature, ensuring that there's safety and security from the family level out to the community, creating equality, opportunity in jobs, and things of that nature. So it's really about creating an economy that works for everyone.
I love that. And it's so needed in this time. Are there any main concerns that are highlighted in the report that you want to lift up?
Well, just about every
everything in it.
I mean, if we want to talk about economic opportunity, being given opportunities to serve, whether it's Congress or the U.S. Senate or wherever. We look at the issues in particular right now. We can release another aspect of this report that deals with issues of food security, breastfeeding parity, things of that nature, lifting them up, and looking at what represents an obstruction in those areas, and eliminating those through legislation, through policy, through working it out with the administration, whatever it is we have to do. To make sure that we've got the children's lunches, the breakfasts at school, nap is appropriate for a family. We're not putting onerous requirements on people in order to qualify for services that they need to survive. Whether or not it's in the food area, the nutrition area, or even in the healthcare area.
I'm glad you added that and that you highlighted for folks that although the report was initially issued in 2022, it's something that's evergreen, meaning that you and your colleagues are going to continue to add to it and expand on it. On the issue of food security and food justice, one of the things I thought was interesting when I dived into the report and read through the materials is really that this has been a fight that details all the way back into the 1960s. And oftentimes when we look at those who have gotten credit for WIC or other programs, they don't look like you and I. And I think it was really helpful for me in reading this report because it's not just talking about the issues, the concerns, and the ways we need to approach them. It's also making sure we root it in history and in truth telling. And Congresswoman Shirley Chisholm, who was a first in many respects in her own right, really was a proponent on supporting a lot of the issues that you lifted up, but food security is definitely one of them, supporting our women and our families. Can you talk a little bit about her history and involvement in that effort from what she was doing now to what you all are doing today?
Well, she certainly is one of the broadest shoulders that we're all standing on. No question about it. And we still talk about her and her work, not only in this area, but just generally showing up and making sure that our voices are heard and our perspectives are realized as we entertain issues that are important to us. And so, she frames the discussions and brings the reality to the situation. She lets us know what the real deal is. She let us know. So she was very instrumental in I guess it's the WIC in particular. But SNAP also, because she was not only concerned about the individual, she was concerned about the family. And she knew that if we were going to have a future, that we had to ensure that there was security in the whole family. And so I'm not familiar with everything that she's done in this area. I just know that whenever we talk about food insecurity, or SNAP or WIC or anything when it comes to women and in this field as well as others, her name's always figures prominently.
Well, thank you for adding that context. And I think it's important for us to think about the family and focus on the family. I mean, any societal issue you talk about, especially those that impact the Black community, all go back to the family. Oftentimes, I think when we talk about women and Black women in particular, there's this saying that, oh, the superwoman, right? They're supporting their family, they're helping other people's family, they're out working, they're doing a lot. But I think that whole superwoman concept is one that's very dangerous for our community and really for a lot of communities. And I really want to talk a little bit more about mental health and the importance of that because we all are human. We may do a lot and carry carry the fight in many different ways, but life can be hard. We saw it with COVID-19. Can you talk a little bit about mental health in the report, really, and in your advocacy and your work? Why is that important, and what are the things that we should be thinking about as a community?
So one thing, let me speak to what you said about the superwoman thing. Sometimes people need to apply that label to us so that people think that that's an exception, not a rule. Black women have forever managed multiple issues, multiple concerns, from the family to the economics to the educational to the safety and security in the community, because that's what we had to do. That doesn't make us superwoman exclusivity. We're just black women, and we can do it all because we had to do it all.
Right, we have to show up.
So when people sometimes will put a label to it, they want it to seem like that's a rarity. Oh, look how special she is. Well, we're all that special. You know, and we have to remember that. But the mental health issue is something that really did not start with me, with where women were. And where black women were in particular. It started with because I was opening up my Facebook page during a period of time, and every day there was some posting about a youngster, 5, 7, 9, 12, 13, 17, even up to 24, where they were attempting suicide, discussing suicide, trying it, and accomplishing it. And I said to my staff, I don't know what's going on here, but this is frightening, and it's coming up on Facebook every day, but we're not talking about it on the Hill. So as the Congresswoman Caucus on Black Women and Girls and the Black Caucus in general, we can't fix everything, but we can doggone sure elevate the discussion. And as a result of the work we did on pursuing equity in mental health, having the hearings for young people, out of that grew our appreciation and understanding of just in general what was happening in this country with mental health. And we found out a number of things. Number one is that we don't have enough people that work in that field. Less than 3% of the people that work, like psychiatrists, psychologists, that are 3% look like us. There was a lack of research that was being done on our behalf, on behalf of our community, and the uniqueness of being Black, and the persistent institutional racism that we've experienced and what it has meant to our families, to ourselves, and things of that nature. We found that there were the institutions that were doing the research didn't have anybody in there that looked like us, and that the applications for projects and for research projects in particular that dealt with our communities weren't getting the attention. And so as we have moved forward over the last couple of years, starting with young people in this issue and talking with some of the institutions like the Institute for Mental Health, we've got them to realize that they needed to diversify. Who's looking at what's to be researched, who's doing the research, and who's working in the organizations that are ultimately responsible for the funds. So over the last couple of years, recognizing that when we went through COVID, Black women found themselves a lot of times in the jobs that we considered essential for our well-being, but they weren't being paid, and they weren't being the essential pay. We found that there was this food insecurity, housing insecurity, lack of stability in jobs, which the worry was just taking its toll on our community at large. And that was from the children to the mother and to the father as well. And so now this is the fourth mental health discussion I have been engaged in just this week. This is only Tuesday. So we are discussing it in the caucus, Democratic caucus. We're discussing it in our Black caucus. We're discussing it on Zooms like this with other organizations. And just earlier this week, I had an in-person event at one of our colleges, and it was all about mental health. We know that because there is this disparity in lack of healthcare, access to healthcare, that impacts our community greater than others, that we had to suffer alone. We also know that there's been this historical stigma associated with mental health in the Black community. So we've often, even if we had access to healthcare, have not asked for it. And so we're really trying to engage in an amplification that number one, mental health is healthcare. Number two, there's no stigma associated with having it. It's just like if you've got a broken bone, you go to an orthopedist. If you have emotional breakage, you need to go to a psychiatrist or a psychologist. We also know that we need to make sure that there's more incentives into our community to train people, to educate them, and to incentivize them to go into the field of psychology, sociology, therapy, etc. And so out of those hearings that we did targeting young people, and out of our various discussions and caucuses and organizations like the Urban League being interested in hearing about it, there is a very robust discussion about putting resources into mental health. And we need to make that access as easy as possible. Black women are working sometimes 1 and 2 jobs. They're taking care of families. They think that they're okay. They know when they're down. They know when they're low. But they go like, okay, I just gotta get through this day. But sometimes we need you to stop, pause, and work on yourself. And that's why we need to make sure that everybody knows it's okay not to be okay, and it's okay for us to seek ways to make sure that mental health services are available and accessible and affordable.
That's so important. We really do need to be in every aspect of the issue. As you said, from research, we need to be providers. We need to encourage it. And the stigma is real. I mean, we've talked about mental health on this show before, and it's an issue just from the responses that we're seeing in the chat, folks, it really resonates with a lot of people, and there's a lot of work that we need to continue to do in the space. So thank you for your leadership. Thank you for creating space and time to talk about these issues. Thank you for all the partnerships you've had. I know you've been doing work with Mick Silver and others trying to bring data. Because if we don't have the numbers, if we don't really talk about the full scope of the problem, how can we really move forward and get our arms around it and address it? And you're right. In many ways, we are called on to address challenges, called on to be there and be support for our families. But in general, as human beings, if we are not able to take care of our health and well-being inside and out, physical and mental, we can't show up in the way that we need to for everyone else. So thank you for pushing this issue. I'm glad that you're on your fourth conversation this week on this issue, because it really is something that doesn't get enough attention, and we need to continue shining a light on it. And similarly, when we talk about representation and some of the challenges that our community sees, hair discrimination has been one of them and continues to be one. I know you've been a champion in New Jersey, but you've also been a champion nationally. Can you talk about the Crown Act and where we are today and where we need to go?
Well, where we are today is that the Crown Act has passed the House of Representatives on 2 occasions, and it hasn't passed the Senate yet, but it should, because it's not a big deal to pass it. But it is a big deal for Black women and women of color and Black men and Black girls and boys to be treated in a negative way simply because of the way they wear their hair. We know that within the schools, with the discretionary disciplines, girls, Black girls wearing braids or beads or any kind of locks or anything like that are disproportionately disciplined. We know that women who've applied for positions have been told, well, you have to do something with your hair if we bring you on board. Even for those women who are going to be in front of a camera, being anchors. And we're seeing this all the time. I had Zooms with some very accomplished actors and actresses most recently, and they were talking about those who had natural hair being in big money shows, but nobody was there to do their hair or to take care of their hair, or they were given some outrageous big wig to cover their hair because there was no one to take care of their hair. Hair discrimination is racial discrimination. You are being discriminated against because what you look like on your head said something to people who have a problem with your otherness, who have a problem with who you are. Because how I wear my hair, how you wear your hair, how anyone wears their hair has nothing to do with the brain that's inside of that head. Has nothing to do with your motivation to do whatever it is that you want to do. Has nothing to do with whether or not you can afford a house or you can partake in a public accommodation or work a particular job or get an education. It just is not valid. But it is just one more reason that people can be discriminated against. And so we need to amend the discrimination laws to ensure that people recognize that discrimination against hair, that is the locks, the curls, the dreads, the braids, that sort of harkens to the Black culture, the African culture, or whatever. Discrimination in employment and housing and public accommodations in every aspect is illegal. It should be illegal. Now, there are several states who've already taken this on, including my own, New Jersey. There are lots of cities that have taken it on, but we need it to be a national law so that wherever you go, wherever you seek a job, wherever you're trying to buy a house, wherever you're trying to get into a house, to whatever education, that you are not discriminated against simply because of the way you wear your hair. Now, we think that that's absolutely ridiculous, us Black folks, because, you know, we do our hair any way we want to do it, however we feel like doing it. But it's
Right. It's who we are.
It got nothing to do with the brain, you know? And um, it is disheartening to see what happens, particularly with our younger children. The teenage boy who had to have his locks cut right before he was going to do the wrestling match in front of everybody because some racist referee said that he could not participate as long as he had his lock. Okay, so they
And the impact that it has on his psyche.
Yeah.
Can you imagine?
Humiliated him.
Cut it off.
And then he went on and won that match, which will tell you something about us.
We are a resilient people.
And we overcome adversity. We own the overcoming of adversity. Yeah, but just most recently, I was reading about a woman who was seeking a position as a television reporter. She was going to be in front of the camera, and they were telling her she had to do something with her hair. She had to change her hair. Well, it doesn't make any sense. It is a form of discrimination. It should be a form of illegal discrimination. It is a manifestation of racism. And wherever we can, whenever we can, and wherever we can, we need to ensure that those things are not allowed. So the Crown Act is a way of protecting your wearing your hair any which way you want.
Well, thank you for your leadership on this. And I will say, you know, your point about journalists, that resonates with me. I started my career out as a journalist, and early on, you know, it was very clear where there was favoritism when you show up in a certain way, as opposed to when you show up and maybe just how you want to be, your authentic self. And so I had hoped we'd gotten further than that, but as we continue to see incidents pop up, we recognize there is still much further that we need to go. And I mean, it harkens back to the conversations that we were having in the 50s and the 60s. We keep seeing discrimination show up in other forms. There are other things that people, you know, cling to, but we really have to address it at every turn. And so thank you to you and your colleagues for getting this done and passing it in the House. And I encourage all the folks who have joined us today, folks in the movement, folks that care about this issue. I mean, we're so many of us are impacted by it. Put pressure on your senators, right? We have to get the Senate to show up and make this law so that while it's great that we're fighting the fight on the state and local level, we do need national legislation on this. We need to regulate it so that irrespective of whether you live in Brooklyn or you live in Belleville or, you know, anywhere you are in the country, you should not have to deal with this, and there needs to be protections for our people.
Let me just say this. I need you all to call the House of Representatives too. Because all this passed in the 16th and 17th legislative session, we have to pass it again in the House, because we have to pass it every session that is introduced and doesn't get passed in the Senate. So wherever you are, call your representatives in both the House of Representatives and your senators. And that's in the red states, the blue states, the purple states, and any other state that hasn't declared itself. We
need to do it everywhere. They need to hear from us. Yes. And thank you for that. You all heard it from the Congresswoman herself. She said, call her colleagues, call everyone in the House and the Senate. We have to get this done. Congresswoman, look, we can go on and on. There are so many issues. I feel like we're just scratching the surface. The National Urban League would love to have you back in this capacity or others. We thank you for your leadership, but I just want to give you a few moments to, one, tell us what's next for you, and if there's any words of wisdom that you want to share with the folks on. I mean, there's been so much love in comments in the chat. A lot of what you said has really struck a chord with folks, and just want to give you a few minutes just to share some final words.
Thank you. And I would be glad to come back and have conversations with you at any time. I think that we're at this very important moment where hate and love are colliding. But I believe that love is going to trump hate no matter what. Now, there are people and organizations, groups that are talking about what's right and what's wrong in their interest group. There's the LGBTQ community, there's the transgender community, there's the Black community, the Asian Pacific Islanders, the Hispanic, all of us, right? Okay. What do we have in common? What we have in common is the white supremacy hates all of us. And the threat to our safety and security and our access to rights, to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, to democracy, those are being threatened. And so what I want to say to everybody is that we need to be talking to everybody. We need to make sure that our allies are on the same page that we're on, and we're on their page, and that when it comes time for us to show up virtually, show up in message, show up in person, do whatever, we need to show up, and we need to make sure that we are heard loudly. We need to get out of our silos, and we need to be working with other organizations that represent other interests, because the issue is those people that think that all of us are the other and that we can be picked on, diminished, disrespected, disregarded, and threatened. And that's where we are right now. And I have, like I said, I've got a 10-year-old granddaughter. I do this because I want her to have the same rights, at least the same rights that I have. And she doesn't right now. So our work is to work together and to build that coalition of morality, and to let folks know this government is for the people. It's for the people, and we are the people. Thank you for letting me say that.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. It really is coalition building time. We've seen so many of the gains that we've made be eroded. And I know we're all waited with bated breath to hear what's going to come down from the Supreme Court on affirmative action. And know that we'll be calling you, because you've been working on this from since the beginning in your career. But you're right. Hate has been a threat to our democracy. It has been a threat to our progress as human beings, as people. And it really is time for us to work in coalition. We saw in 2020, we saw what can happen when we band together. We saw it in 2022. So folks, really, we just need to make sure that we stay persistent, that we stay consistent, and that we engage. You know, at the National Urban League, we always focus on our campaign, which is Reclaim Your Vote, right? And we need to make sure that we reclaim our vote, we reclaim our power, and that we do all we can so that Congresswoman's granddaughter has a life and a future better than we've experienced. And so we have to keep the fight. Marion White Edelman always said, you can't be what you can't see. So thank you for being there and standing up and really being a beacon for all of us, being a light for so many of us, Congresswoman. We appreciate all you do, and know that you always have friends here at the League. If you need us, call us. We're ready. We're ready to stand with you. We're going to call all of our congressional members and get this done on the Crown Act. But thank you again for your leadership, and thank you to everyone that's joined us. Remember, the time for justice is always now. Take care and have a great evening. Bye, everyone.